Election night. Tonight, electoral, electoral, electoral. Dichotomy of blue and red. How my Latina body, my pinkish vagina, my nipples protrude just so. How blue my lips after blowjob. How blue my veins and loyal pump to my heart. How nasty woman me. How proud. And the nation teeters on a razor, ready to bleed red, red, red. My pupils in stun for a president who believes me a disgusting animal. How numbers tally and panic seeds in my chest and my mind traumas. Shit. Inauguration, ladies. The president finds you all beautiful pieces of ass. Rise. To all my brothers and sisters of color, rise. To my gay, trans, queer soulmates, rise. To all my nasty women, rise. To all who experience sexual assault, rise. To all the immigrants who make this nation great, rise. Alone is not us, rise. Degradation, not our destiny, rise. Hateful slander and tear at our children's ears, tear our hearts, remains feeble to our strength, rise. Not alone, not alone. Not alone, 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 not a singular voice left unattended. Rise, yes, rise. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia Zamora, for that wonderful poetry, and welcome, viewers, to the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour, brought to you by the Broad Stage at Home. I'm your host, Sandra Tsing Loh, with freshly washed hair, but I see it's not entirely tamped down, but no worries. Today's theme, good trouble, necessary trouble. To help introduce this hour, let's bring on, as we always do, Red Hen Press co-founder and managing editor, dare I say, the notorious Kate Gale. Welcome, Kate. Hello.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you, Sandra. And it's going to be an amazing evening. That was a great start to what is going to be an amazing evening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to help you introduce the hour, we welcome, as we always do, not troublesome, but very good and necessary, Broad Stage Artistic Director, Rob Bayless. Hello, Rob.
Hello. It's great to see you both.
Greetings. Okay, you guys. So good trouble, necessary trouble. Kate, could you begin by just unpacking the thinking behind this phrase and tonight's conversation?
Well, obviously, that's a phrase that was born by the late, great John Lewis. But it has to do with tonight's event, because everyone who is going to be speaking tonight is someone who believes in making trouble and believes in waking people up. And it's time for us to wake up in America, and it's time for us to make trouble and make change. And I think that's what everyone tonight is going to be speaking about. And we who are creative are good at making change. We're good at asking ourselves what else we can do, and then doing it, and then coming up with something else. And in theater is all about making change from beginning to end. And Rob, you know all about that.
I do indeed. And here we are doing it in the virtual space with these incredible writers. And I can't agree with you more that our cultural assets right now are our most endangered and our most precious. This is where the change will come. We'll be hearing from a lot of different voices tonight, and all on a variety of different angles on social justice. But particularly tonight, I'm excited about elements of this that are, as we're talking about things like specifically racism and sexism, you know, they're so deeply embedded in our American culture that, of course, they're entirely in the language. They're in the words we choose. They're in the words we don't choose. They're in the deadly silences where we do not speak, or where we've ended a conversation or don't allow anyone to speak. So for me, it's about turning to the poets. It's turning to the poets because they can get to the microscopic level of language. They can get to the atomic level of language. And in that sense, really give us the words and the means with equal amounts of force and generosity to find our way out of these oppressions, to root them out of the way we hear and speak and engage. And I think if there's one thing about this moment that is helpful to us, it's that we're blown apart. And maybe because we're all in pieces, there's a chance to just look around in the rubble, and as we reassemble, just leave certain things behind as we step boldly into the future with some of this acknowledged, spoken to, and done away with. And I think that's such a beautiful place for the arts to reside and for artists to reside. And I'm so grateful to the poets tonight for all they're going to share around that.
Yeah, and I think that the audience is in for some surprises. If you predict how you think this hour is going to go, I think there's a lot of variety and a lot of dichotomies and tensions within being an artist and also having a political voice, if you will. So I'm excited. So are you guys ready? Shall we? Okay, yeah. Thank you, Kate and Rob. Adja. And with that, we'll bring on our first guest, Afaa Weaver. Afaa Weaver's most recent book is Spirit Boxing in 2017. His awards include a Guggenheim Fellowship and the 2014 Kingsley Tufts. After retiring from full-time teaching in 2017, he's now a member of the MFA faculty at Sarah Lawrence. Afaa was part of the first faculty at the Kava Kanam retreat in 1997. That's for Black poets over 18 and above, I believe. And in 1998, he was named the first elder of the Kava Kanam organization. He and his wife, Kristen Schedule, excuse my pronunciation, live in the Hudson Valley area of New York, where it is right now, not 6:09, but 9:09 in the evening. So we're really happy that he can join us. Thanks for joining us, Afaa.
Thank you, Sandra. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to everyone at Red Hen for including me in this presentation conversation. I'm going to read from a small book entitled A Hard Summation, which came about when conservative Republican friends of mine in Kenosha, Wisconsin, asked if I would write about African-American history, and that was in 2012. And I took that opportunity to give what is a summary overview of African-American history. And as I saw it, as I still see it, and as my friends see it, this is an educational project, one aimed at communication. And they were my primary intended audience, and they really loved the book, and they hope that it can help people to understand one another. All right. So I'll read the first two poems. So let me also say I'm quite happy, quite proud to be an elder of Kave Kanam. I was, as you say, the first elder in 1998, but there's several of us, and Kave Kanam has changed the course of American poetry. Now, the first poem from A Hard Summation, The Kidnappers. A cruel silence in the night. The children's songs pulled under a rustle of leaves, mothers turning away for a second to pick up toys dropped in shadows. As hands cover children's mouths, their heels struggling in soft dirt, swallowed by forest, birth turned to death, the yard empty, neighbors hushed by wailing from houses where ache lives. A cruel silence in the night. The children's songs gone. Mama pulled into the broad arms of Papa, dry womb of old sinew and bone, eyes glazed, sons and daughters, hope against old age, swept up by strangers to lie down in the music of deep water. A brief prelude to the second poem, A Ship's Log. In 1840, a ship left Freetown in West Africa with a human cargo of 98.3% children. And it was seized in Havana and landed there on December 29th of that year. The ship's name was Jesus Maria, and the captain's name was Lorenzo Ruiz. A Ship's Log. Children who gave us life, a family seed on board the Jesus Maria. Who took you? Sherbro, Mende, Portuguese. Who took your name to your mother's ears to whisper, child gone, womb of your grandchildren gone? Who set you free in Havana? What filled you in the ship of 234 mostly children, half of them boys, half of them girls, 8, 9, 10 years into a language they will forget? What happened to the crew listening to children cry for weeks from Freetown to Havana, Freetown where slaves begin? And did the crisp light of the moon curse sailors who waited to ease below to prowl and touch at night? Children, a ship full of mothers screaming where these could not hear their names being cried out. Girls and boys shivering in the creak of wood in the water, the forward dip and lean of sail to wind, their names being cried out in languages they will barely know if they live to think of what they know. Ribbed womb of ship belly, plank to plank, cog and nail, cupped hands of demons moving in the Atlantic to progress with children whose names have kept their power. Mamboa, Wende, Sulu, Gueboa, Mafoma, Janu, Boya, Daru, Mahu, Cobre, Mafe, Ita, Dora, Dweo, Makeni, Momo, Maneni, Kanunde, Kwamba, Glenda, Iakaye, Sese, Belu, Coloma. Sons and daughters, hope against old age, swept up by strangers to lie down in the music of deep water, a baptism in a melody of grief, the children praying to be loved in a world their mothers do not know, in Africa, where stars try to make peace with death. And this third and last poem, The Little Rock 9. It is Monday. I am 12 years old. Summer still feel like summer to me. Ernest Green. My elementary school principal was white. I only had one white teacher. She was named after the juice the astronauts took into space, Tang. I got some Tang at home. Did you hear about the little girls who got killed while we was in Sunday school yesterday? Elizabeth Eckford. I live in Baltimore, and so do you. Your people, the raw and stinky crew. My daddy, a big shot on the avenue. Your daddy can't buy a pair of shoes. Jefferson Thomas. One little girl was named Addie Mae, just like my aunt from South Carolina. And when I come home from church, everybody was crying about the news from Alabama. I know Alabama. Alabama was on the math test today. If you're going 65 miles an hour leaving Richmond, near where my cousins live, and you drive for 12 hours straight, will you get to Alabama? Hell no, because Alabama in hell. Terrence Roberts. The bus is hot, the white neighborhood full of angry faces, just 2 miles from where we live. Angry faces I see at night when I look out the window and wonder why I have to sit next to white children to be smart. I was smart all the time. My mama told me so when I did things the right way. Extra things, good things. Smart is knowing when something's missing. Carlotta Walls Lanier. I like Malcolm X because he looks like me when I am so mad I can't stand myself. When my cousins take my model car shelf down, break up my cars, and then dare me to fight. When I have to walk from the white school home through the white neighborhood, when I miss the bus, or when I get a beating for what my friend did and he get a beating too, but mine hurt more because he did it, not me. So I like Malcolm X. He's so mean, Mr. Green. He's so mean. You got to be mean in Chicago. Jenny Jean Brown. When I was 14, a boy kissed me when we were walking to the movies. He sneaked me and I tried not to smile because kissing is a sin, and all the while I was so full of hallelujah on the inside. On the way to the movies we go to now because somebody made a way somehow, standing in lines with protest signs, dogs barking all around. So I make sure I sound educated when Henry sneaks to kiss me on the way to the movies. We have all kinds of movies in Philadelphia. Gloria Ray Carlmark. New York is faster than yesterday. Been here and gone before you remember it ain't here no more. We go downtown in the middle of tomorrow when it still be today. New York is faster than yesterday. I got a quarter for your $10 bill. Give it to me, I'll pay your cleaner's bill because New York is faster than yesterday. And a high school diploma is all a genius like me will ever need in a city where a thrill is more to me. If you will believe me, and believe me, you will. Thelma Mothershed. What a word will do. My mama used to say at night when her work was done, rearing back in that chair of hers with the stuffing falling out of the arms, what a word will do, and you know what words are for. She would say, laying her head back, closing her eyes, and settling down inside some dream. She never told us her dreams. When we asked her, she just said we would know when the moon turned over 3 times and ghosts rose up out of the sea. Mama was half out of this world. In California, we all the way in it. Melba Patillo Bills. Little Rock 9 shaking the line between white no and black oh yes. I'll walk all over what is mine, thanks to Little Rock 9. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing poetry, Afaa Weaver. Afaa will return at the end of the show, just in around about 25 minutes for the panel discussion. If you're just joining us, this is the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour brought to you by the Broad Stage at Home. I'm your host, Sandra Tsing Loh. Next up, we have the wonderful Kazim Ali. Kazim Ali was born in the United Kingdom and has lived transnationally in the United States, Canada, India, France, and the Middle East. His award-winning poetry volumes include Inquisition, Skyward, The Far Mosque, The 40th Day, All One's Blue, and the cross-genre texts Bright Felon and Wind Instrument. His novels include The Secret Room, a string quartet. His essay collections, the hybrid memoir Silver Road, Essays, Maps, and Calligraphies, and Fasting for Ramadan, Notes from a Spiritual Practice. He's also an accomplished translator and editor. After a career in public policy and organizing, he's currently a professor of literature at UC San Diego. His newest books are a volume of 3 long poems entitled The Voice of Sheila Chandra and a memoir of his Canadian childhood, Northern Light. Welcome, Kazim.
Thank you so much.
Hello. So
hi.
great to see you. Yeah.
It's good to be here.
So you're going to be reading from The Voice of Sheila Chandra today. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey and inspiration for this and what you're going to read?
Yeah, this book is the book is comprised of 3 long poems, actually. And the first, and roughly speaking, the theme of all 3 of them is how does the individual contend with an often violent history? And how can the individual act even in the face of great tragedy? And so the first, I'm going to read from the first poem tonight, which is called Hesperine for David Berger. And I was commissioned, actually, it was a commission to write a poem about a national park. And I chose to write about the David Berger National Memorial. David Berger was one of the athletes who was killed at Munich in 1972. He was an athlete on the Israeli Olympics team, but he grew up in Cleveland, not far away from where I lived. As I was writing this poem, the summer in which I was writing this poem, the students at Yale University, all the previous academic year, had been involved in a campaign to get racist art that was depicting racist subject matter and or portraits of slave owner donors of Yale University from the past to be removed from the colleges, and to have those colleges that were named after people who had owned slaves to be renamed. And in the midst of this campaign, a dining hall worker named Corey Menifee, the university had refused to remove the stained glass windows, and he broke one of the stained glass windows with his broomstick in the dining hall. And so that interrupted the poem about David Berger, and then it was further interrupted. I came to learn one of my former yoga students, who's a man named Mohammed Al-Khatib, who is now a yoga teacher himself, had determined after the Arab Idol competition was won by a Palestinian singer, he determined that he would like to train for the Rio Olympics in 2016 as a sprinter. And so these three men, their stories came together in the poem, actually, and that's what I'm gonna read. It's a long poem, so I'm going to read from it, a little excerpt from it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So here we go. You ready for the poetry? Okay. The Hesperine for David Berger. Begin with the dining hall attendant at the ivy-covered university who smashed the stained glass window, because we are now going to actually change history. Imagine then in the suburbs of Cleveland a sculpture of steel rings broken in halves but opening up away from the bullet-ridden history of the burning helicopter towards the open sky. Imagine neither a conditional future if the past were different, nor forging ahead from the broken, but something newer that bridged that loss. History as fragile as stained glass, and yet writing new narratives that shape every movement forward. David Berger at 27, deciding to move across the world to Israel to train and compete in the Olympics, 1972, Munich. What Corey Menifee did is he climbed up on top of a table in the dining room, and with the long handle of his broom, for each of you a practice, says the Quran. If God had willed, he would have just made you one people. From this summit, I then plummet into the time of unstrung lyres to try to go back into the dark time. Do you know what your body is? Do you know what God is? Shattered, the panes of the stained glass window, depicting enslaved workers bearing cotton along a road. Hesperus, the evening star, shines with a cold light through the tightest dawn, evening, sharp-edged and dissolute. He came into work in the dining room every day, and he hated that one image in the glass. And one day he just, sun is going down on the wrong horizon. The sea glows green, then blue, then green again. This is where I was born, this in-between place. Do you know what God is? What it's not? Do you know what art is? What it's not? Do you know what a nation is? A citizen? A crime? The star of evening's twin brother was Phosphorus, star of morning, who rose up in the dawn and brought new day. A metaphor, of course, for new life. And what is the sound of misdemeanors hefting the minutes when they took David Berger and his roommates and then 5 others in the second apartment? The window shattered and glass rained down onto the street outside. The worker was arrested, but the university declined to press charges. The beautiful were made beautiful. The blood in their bodies sank. And in the rain of white phosphorus down into the streets of Gaza, I have come back to this village on the Mediterranean shore after 16 years. Who was I then? The same age as David Berger, the same age as Muhammad al-Khatib. But then the Greeks learned from the Babylonians that the evening star and the morning star that they had envisioned and made gods of and written poems about were in fact the same heavenly body. In either case, we are now inventing a past, which means it changes the future, which means the machine of time is real. It is made of gears and parts. We live by laws of men, drawn of laws of gods. Men say are real. Munich, 1972. The road leads right through young men's brightest hours. Ramallah, 2016. Muhammad al-Khatib laces up his running shoes, ridiculously trying to train as a sprinter with neither spikes nor coach nor starting blocks. Impossible to see, impossible to feel, refracted, how finished the pattern that is every unfolding. The bright glass of many colors, the slaves hauling cotton, shattered and flickering down toward the concrete sidewalk. And so I shout down with ragged throat this encroaching blue that brings dawn, then brightening day, then David and his teammates hustled by the kidnappers into a helicopter bound for the airport, promised passage out of Germany. Muhammad's still seeking to shave tenths of seconds off his time. There is no accounting for his decision. This unending pattern of abstraction to say we can inscribe ourselves into the landscape. We can change the past. We can write ourselves as a letter arriving unannounced to God with no return address. What other explanation does any scholar have for the verses of the Quran that are neither sentences nor sayings, but just series of letters like Alif, Lam, Mim? Ta, ha. Corey Menifee climbed up on the table. He just said, "It's 2016. I shouldn't have to come to work and see things like that. That thing's coming down today. I'm tired of it." Muhammad left Palestine to go to Houston, Texas, where he found enough open space to run and train. He said, "I only wanted to hear Palestine's anthem in the stadium," he said. To hear is to make real. Not until epochs of time later did the Romans look into the sky at Phosphorus, whose name means bearer of light, and translate it into their own language as Lucifer, called also son of morning. Does every journey continue down the barrel of a gun from the Olympic Village to the helicopter to the airport where the trick was played to the shootout to the firestorm? What sound breaks the circle of action and reaction? Can history be unwoven, the tightness released, to make it possible to breathe and write anew? Glass littering down to the window, to the street. Clear, the sun shines through. Hesperus makes a play for the sacred space of grief. Phosphorus rains down upon Gaza into the bodies of unmade sprinters, weightlifters, pole vaulters, gymnasts. What if God is improvising? ha, scene, meme. There is no time left. David has a plane to catch, says goodbye to his parents. Ein, scene, off. The broomstick shatters the glass window and the image glitters down. Goth, ha, ya, ein, sod. A voice then breaks as evening covers us in a downpour. What else? Ya, scene. And then, not in the present moment, not in some deathless, wished-for past, but somewhere very ordinary, a normal day, a spring day, a little chilly. There is Muhammad in the hills above Ramallah lacing up, even though there is no open ground to train on, no spikes for his shoes, no starting blocks.
Thank you so much, Kazim Ali, for that incredible poetry. And Kazim is going to return in just about 10 minutes for a panel discussion at the end of the show. And if you're just joining us, this is the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour, brought to you by the Broad Stage at Home. I'm your host, Sandra Tsing Loh. And with that, we turn to our next writer, not a poet per se, but author of many amazing works. Steve Almond is the author of 10 books of fiction and nonfiction, including the New York Times bestsellers Candy Freak and Against Football. In 2018, he published Bad Stories, a literary investigation of what the hell just happened to our country. This is from his bio, which he wrote to keep from going crazy. His new book is called William Stoner and the Battle for the Inner Life, which is about reading and writing and the struggle to pay attention to our lives. For 4 years, Steve hosted the New York Times Dear Sugars podcast with his pal Cheryl Strayed. You may have heard of her. His short stories have been anthologized in the Best American Short Stories, Pushcart Prize, Best American Erotica, and the Best American Mysteries. He also publishes crazy DIY books, and he's the father of 3. And he spent all day with them, I believe. So welcome, Steve Almond. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great introduction. I do not have a cat, I'm sorry to say, but I do. Some of my children may be running upstairs and screaming occasionally, so that will be an interesting possible feature.
The cat, yeah, they can go across the bottom of your screen. That would be ideal, but let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So tell us the origins behind Bad Stories, which, as you've said hilariously, would make everyone who read it depressed. But I read it, so it's depressing, but in a wry way. It's also, but your humor reigns through. But tell us about this process of writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I think the critics are calling it the feel bad read of forever. There's certain books. First, I want to say that this poetry that we've been listening to is fantastic and kind of just fills me with a certain hope and optimism and sense of expansiveness, which I will now try to crush under the boot heel of my awful prose rhetoric. But, certain books, like I write books when I can't get rid of stuff by other means. And, there's some books that I'm sort of choosing, but this was one that just chose me. In my little white guy bubble on, election night, I just was looking at my kids who were asleep. And as anybody who has kids knows, there's nothing more blessed than a child who is asleep. And I just thought, how am I going to explain what the adult world, like this category decision that the adult world made? And it was very clear that I wasn't going to do that through academia. I'm not an academic. I'm an apostate journalist who kind of turned away from journalism for short stories and essays. And I thought, well, what I really am is a storyteller. And the way that I see human beings constructing meaning is through stories. And the way that I can probably get this across at a very basic level is by saying, look, human beings are the storytelling species. And when we tell good stories, like the Sermon on the Mount, right, is a series of good stories, the outcomes are good. And when we tell bad stories, the outcomes inevitably are going to be terrible. So rather than feeling deep stress over the sort of doom scrolling through the latest atrocity, we should try to trace back where these bad behaviors came from, and they inevitably come from bad stories. So I just tried to basically come up with a compendium of what those bad stories are.
Yes, and you will read and you will share them with our audience that who will be both depressed but then illuminated by the end of the hour. So that
well, let's not oversell it, but I'll certainly read a little chunk of the book to kind of convey what I'm up to.
Fantastic.
Okay, so here it is. The term bad stories is absurdly, perhaps dangerously reductive. I could employ a more elegant term, flawed or distorted, but I'm going to stick with bad because it casts the widest net and because it suggests a malignant motive, as well as dubious content and damaging outcomes. Stories don't fall from the clouds, after all. They are invented and refined and promoted by particular narrators with particular agendas. If we want to understand the bad stories that dominated the 2016 election, we have to examine the context from which they arose and accept that our received version of history is often nothing more than the needlework of the powerful. Consider this brief rewrite from the novelist Kurt Vonnegut. Quote, "As children, we were taught to memorize 1492 as the year people began living full and imaginative lives on the continent of North America. Actually, people had been living full and imaginative lives on the continent of America for hundreds of years before that. 1492 was simply the year sea pirates began to rob, cheat, and kill them." The same revisionism should be applied to the story of our own national origin, with its noble assertion that all men are created equal. We all know the author of those words was an aristocrat who owned human beings, and that our founding documents were designed to safeguard this peculiar institution. Slavery, in turn, was constructed upon another bad story that wealthy colonists began telling long before Thomas Jefferson came along. Poor people vastly outnumbered the rich in the colonies, European immigrants, slaves, and indentured servants of European, Caribbean, and African heritage. If these populations recognized their mutual economic interests and banded together, as they did during Bacon's Rebellion, for instance, the ruling class was toast. So landed settlers came up with the story of race, and specifically the concept of whiteness, which held that all European immigrants in the colonies, regardless of class, were bound by a pigmentary alliance that made them inherently superior to anyone with darker skin. This alliance didn't make an indentured servant any less indentured. It merely granted them what W.E.B. Du Bois would later call, quote, the psychological wage of whiteness. This bad story has proved remarkably resilient. It was what compelled poor Southern whites to fight and die in defense of slavery, an institution that crippled their own economic fortunes. It drove the atrocities of the Jim Crow laws, the domestic terrorism of groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, and the electoral ambitions of Dixiecrats and later the Republican Party, whose leaders adopted a Southern strategy predicated on racial appeals to whites. Donald Trump tweaked his pitch to suit the era, swapping in illegal aliens and Muslims, but it was a familiar story, the one rich white Americans always tell poor white Americans so that they'll blame their loss of status and security on people of color. So, like I said, very uplifting.
No, it's really well said, and as you say, from your white guy bubble, you've joined. I'm not going to say join the club, but the way that you've put that is like you're a very thoughtful father to be able to tell that kind of story to your.
Yeah, that may be a little complicated for the kids, but some of them are at a very basic, like the idea that which the kids are hearing all the time, that America is a representative democracy. It's just nonsense. It's always been nonsense, and it's a wishful thought. But it's also a piece of propaganda, and you can, I think, kids aren't dumb. You know, they can pick up on somebody who's a malignant bully really quickly. So, you know, in some ways, I was trying to write at a fundamental enough level that sort of anybody could sort of unpack how did we get here rather than puzzling over it.
Right, and to a certain extent, I think what is the hope and is the curiosity and the interest of actually learning about how America the story of this continent, that it's not just the Yankee Doodle Dandy and the Thanksgiving and this and that, of just, and the slave trade, for instance, and how it was global, and and Afaa's poem about the children in that ship is just like, children.
Right.
I
mean, human cargo, right.
So I think to the certain extent that art reaches out, it's this kind of storytelling and illumination of the human feeling, et cetera, that makes art a really powerful tool here. On that note, I think that we're going to bring back, your panel, I'm going to bring back Afaa Weaver and Kazim for a chat amongst you writers and artists in this particular time. And you're free. I'm not going to moderate this conversation. I'm sort of generally interested if how the times of this year in particular has affected you as a person and as a writer, and where you see the future might be going for artists in this time, or anything else that occurred to you when you were listening to each other's work.
Mm-hmm. I'll say one thing. I thought these poems were so beautiful, and particular lines kept pinging with me. And one line that Corey Manafee says, that thing's coming down today. I'm tired of it. I have a wish. It might be something more than a wish, but I think that is how a lot of America feels right now.
Yeah.
And the question, right? Would you agree, Kazim?
Well, that was a direct quote from Corey Manafee talking to reporters, because everybody wanted to know, what happened? What was the day, that day? Why did you do this? This was not like a Rosa Parks situation where he was involved, where there was a plan and he was going to do this. And he was aware of the protests. He saw the students outside protesting. And when the provost announced that they were not going to remove the stuff, I guess he snapped in a way. He just said, you know what? And then he just did it. And, his job was at risk. There were, the window was shattered out onto the street. So there are, criminal charges. Yale University declined to cooperate with the New Haven Police Department. So those charges were eventually dropped. But it was a real issue because the students had been doing their, proper, nonviolent, whatever, petitions, what have you, for a long time. And I think that people now are questioning, on the news in terms of like, why are these are, riots are happening and people are destroying businesses and stuff like that. But then, Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012 and Michael Brown before that, and before that, and before that, and before that. So it's like, it's a great shame, in fact, that on us, not as individual people, because some of us understand, but as a society, as the American society, it is our great shame that we're still at this way. Who wants to be out in the street throwing something through a window? What worker wants to smash something at his job? Nobody. Do you know what I mean? So this is the question: is like where this anger comes from? How is this anger used? What is allowable in the political sphere at this, and what's next if things don't change?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
Syria was a civil society.
Mm-hmm.
The whole time. Everybody who knew about the Middle East would say, well, in Damascus, it's not like that. Like the type of things that are happening in Baghdad or Beirut or wherever, they don't happen in Damascus, and until they did.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My other cat wants to say hi.
I don't know if a cat or a cow are able to wave at the camera.
Yeah. So I just think it's a question of like, where are we going what do we do as a society? Yes, we as individual people will make decisions, but
Yeah. Afaa, thoughts?
Well, I think our three presentations are connected. I mean, I see the connections going up through all three of us, and the action taken by the man at Yale, and then Steve, the way you appeal to a general consciousness with that is just, I think, tremendous, and it's the design of the wealthy and the powerful to keep people from seeing the overall structure, and that it means that much to them. And I think it became clear to me that, and I think to many other people, when choices were being made as to where to put support systems, they went to the systems that were strongest and wealthier, and to its where we now have a clear division between Wall Street economy and the real economy.
Right.
And where the anger comes from, in working on these poems, I was thinking about showing the case for the generational transmission of trauma and anger and frustration, and how, as an African American, I'm speaking for myself, I can't speak for everyone else, but I think many others will agree, being African American in this country is like living with constant gaslighting,
Right.
being told this is not happening to you. And you're standing there and you're feeling it, or you're sitting there, or you're lying down. And Jacob Blake, the young man in Kenosha, is now telling his story. There's an interview from the hospital bed, and he says, it hurts to breathe and it hurts to sleep, And I think that's just such a powerful thing to say. And, it did begin in slavery. And I think that Isabel Wilkerson is right on target with her new book, Caste.
Right.
The wealthy have built a caste system that uses race as a driver, And it's a vast system, and it comes out of European expansion, But to say all of that, what I hope, and when he was shot in Kenosha, to come back to your question, Sandra, I was really, really upset. The kids were in the car, and they followed him, and these children have to live with the experience of seeing their father shot. He's paralyzed. I was just horribly upset. And I've been communicating with my conservative friends in Kenosha, and some of them are watching us right now. I alerted them to the program, and they're watching. And we bond around our appreciation and love of one another as human beings, regardless of our differences. And that's my hope, because we are different we are different in what we believe politically, and also in terms of our, religion. We are very different, but we hold on to one another as human beings. And I think that's been so far lost in this country, if there ever was, And
Yeah.
And people here don't understand the kind of pain that goes on in the rest of the world. I'm watching the Frontline documentary on the war in Iraq through the eyes of people in Iraq, and it's so painful, incredibly painful, if you will allow yourself to feel. And in Wisconsin, they explained to me that the concept that they wanted me to sort of hover around in this book is one of sharing grief. And so the way to change people is to invite them to share your grief, Right. And so when a young man in Iraq explained how a mortar landed on his brother's head and all that were left were pieces, and they had to gather pieces from the ground and assemble them so that his mother would think there was a whole, but there was nothing but pieces left.
Right.
And the extent to which the U.S. was involved in that, and our connectedness and the fact of how we're complicit in these tragedies, it's but anyway, yeah, I'm just so great to hear both of you, and that language, like you said, Steve, for anyone, I think it's just really very clear, It's very clear, and Kazim, the image of that glass, and it's just wow. It's just, and that frustration, and it's like you say, it wasn't planned. It's like you just snap, It's like you don't even understand what's happening. You're just reacting. You're just overwhelmed in these moments, So, but it was really good.
In terms of Corey Menifee, his action was a turning point in the campaign. They took all those stained glass windows down, and they renamed the college after Grace Hopper, who was a Black computer scientist and mathematician, pioneering mathematician. And they gave the stained glass to the Yale Art Museum, And the conservator, whose job it is to repair damaged work, decided not to repair the window. So it is she's created it in a frame, so it's displayable. It's not just a pile of pieces, but it's put back together in the frame like a jigsaw, but it's broken. She didn't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Steve?
In a way, that shattered window it's a bad story. It's a human being seeing the erasure of his real story and just reacting to it and saying, that's not true. That's a bad story. It's a piece of artistic propaganda. It's a wishful idea of what the slave's life was like. And part of the crick of bad stories is that it's not just that a story can be propagandistic or intended to sow discord and division. It's that those stories push out of the way and end up erasing the real stories, which have to do, generally speaking, with people's vulnerability. You know, the great bad story in human nature is that we try to use our grievances as a way of hiding our vulnerabilities. And good demagogues and corrupt political actors know how to exploit that. And what the artist can do, and maybe has to do in some way, is try to enlarge people's moral imaginations by forcing them to hear a story. It's what I love about Afaa's reaching across to conservatives. You cannot say you're wrong about this, that, or that policy. It's not that. It's at a level of story. You have to say to them, I need to tell you a true story that I have inherited as part of my history. And I think people, rather than asking, what are your political beliefs, we should be asking, what stories did you hear that made you construct this version of the world? That's the only way, at least so far as I'm concerned, that you actually can get into people's inner lives, is through story.
And I think if we'll do one final quick go around of kind of the journey of this, and I think instead of grievances to share grief, it really seemed to be something that you were talking about off a little bit. So, and we'll start with you, Steve. Do you see any hope, any glimmers of hope in this journey of art and body?
Oh, look, hey, everybody's anguish is understandable. Action is required. That's the way I look at it. And we got to have a little bit of Corey Menifee in this moment and say, that thing is coming down today. I'm tired of it. And we have to say that with our actions as well as our sort of online rhetoric. And when people say, gee, what's going to happen? Are the millennials going to save us, or the media? And I just go, dude, it's like in church. You're going to save you. Don't look at anybody else. Ask yourself, what am I doing to try to author a better version of the American story, whatever that is. And I'm fanatically optimistic. I really feel like there are far more citizens of good faith than there are people who are, sort of, for whatever reason, their hopes have kind of curdled into cynicism. I just believe that there's a vast majority, and if we get out there, there's going to be a great story that's authored.
Fantastic. I'll go to Afaa, and then Kazim, you'll have the last word. Quickly, one thought, something that gives you hope in what art is doing now.
When I'm involved in experiences like this, I'm filled with hope. But I will also say that when I turn off the machinery and I go out into town here, and I live in a purple county, and I go out and I see people and I sense a whole other genuine reality that's going on, I'm hopeful that we will become less and less influenced by this deliberate attempt to make us all very angry with one another.
Right.
And to stop being controlled.
Yeah. Kazim, thank you, Afaa.
Well, I just want to give a quick epilogue to the poem also, which is that Muhammad was invited by Carl Lewis to come to Houston and train with him. And he trained with him. He did not qualify for Rio, but he trained again for Tokyo, and he did qualify for Tokyo. So he will hopefully run when that happens. I want to harken back to a scene from the Heath Ledger film, The Knight's Tale, where Geoffrey Chaucer has just gambled all night and he's naked, and the Heath Ledger character has to bail him out. And the pardoner and the summoner are the villains behind this. And Chaucer says to them, I I was naked for a day, you will be naked for all eternity. I will eviscerate you in fiction. That is what he said. And so I know that there are good stories that we have to tell, but there is a kind of bad story that must also be written. No matter what happens in November, we who are the writers, we are going to tell the truth about these times.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Amazing. Okay, thank you to our panelists. And I'm going to bring on now our last poet of the evening. Portland poet Frances Payne Adler, professor emerita at California State University, Monterey Bay, founded the first creative writing and social action program in the US there in 1996. It was one of the founding faculty hired to transform the former Fort Ord military base into a university. She's the author of 5 books, Making of a Matriot, Raising the Tents among them, her current collaborative exhibition, Dare I Call You Cousin, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, showed most recently at Brandeis University. Called by Adrian Rich an artist of the difficult, Adler is co-editor of Fire and Ink, an anthology of social action writing. And tonight, Frances has the last word.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frances Payne Adler, and I'm going to read you a poem from my book, The Making of a Matriot. But before I do, I want to tell you the backstory of how I invented the word. It was a long time ago. It was in the run-up to the first Gulf War in 1991. And I was sitting at my desk at the university, and I heard on the radio that our defense forces had invented a missile, and they called it a Patriot missile. And I said, well, if that's what a Patriot looks like, what does a Matriot look like? And that evening, I created a definition of the word. And it has 3 parts. So a Matriot is one who loves his or her country, one who loves and protects the people of his or her country, and one who perceives national defense as health, education, and shelter for all of the people in his or her country and the world. So that's a definition. So before I read you the poem, I want to tell you that it is a poem in the voice of Helen Van de Veer. Now, Helen Van de Veer was an 87-year-old activist who, worked for social justice all her life. And I was working at that time with a friend of mine, photographer Kira Carrillo-Corson. And this was her grandmother-in-law. Helen was Kira's grandmother-in-law. And Kira and I were in San Francisco doing research, interviewing people who were sick and couldn't get health care. Our exhibition, it was called The Matriot's Dream, Healthcare for All, was going to show in the Capitol building in DC. And we were doing research and putting some finishing touches onto the exhibition. And we went to park the car. And right in front of the car, there was some graffiti on the wall. It said, "Revolution, the day has come." And we went to dinner that night, and Kira's grandmother was there, Helen Van de Veer was there, and we asked her if she wanted to be included in the picture. And so she came with us the next day, and she posed in front of the wall. And that photograph of Helen is on the cover of the book. I don't know if you can see this, but there she is. That's Helen Van de Veer with her fist in the air. Okay, so after we took the photo, Kira took the photograph, we took Helen out to lunch, and I said to her, Helen, if you were the president and you were in charge of the national budget, what would you spend the money on? And she said, me? Nobody ever asks me what I think. And she proceeded to tell us exactly what she thinks. So this poem is her words. It is in her words. It was crafted, of course, for cadence and rhythm, but these are her words. For Helen Van de Veer, born 1904. Matriot. There's not much that's important at my age except making the world a better place. What would I do? I say we damn well better get out on the streets again. Everyone has to put their hand to the wheel and get out and get off their butt like in the 60s. We had compassion then, and we've lost it. It breaks my heart. I've lived through 2 depressions, 2 of them. Everyone at that time was just sick about the way things were, just like now, only it's worse now. I see things falling apart, people living on the streets, children beaten in their homes, sick people without health care. Imagine this in a country that spends so much on the war machine. I'd spend the money on health instead. I'd see that children are born healthy and make sure they stay that way. All children, no matter what age. I'd clean the air, the water. I'd take away all that polluting shit they put on vegetables. I'd promote the use of sun, sea, and wind for natural energy. I'd save the forests, especially the redwoods. I'd ban firearms. I'd take away every nuclear device man to man. No more wars, ever. Now we're talking health. How are we going to pay for all this? No one ever says we don't have enough money to go to war. No one ever says we don't have money for national defense. This is national defense. Thank you. So go vote, everybody. Go vote and use the matriot word, spread it around. You know what? Get it to Kamala. Go vote.
Frances Payne Adler and all of our other artists today, Kazim Ali, Steve Almond, Afaa Weaver, and Felicia Zamora. This has been the Red Hen Press Poetry Hour, brought to you by the Broad Stage. I've been your host, Sandra Tsing Loh, and I would say stay out of trouble, but considering tonight's theme, I say consider good trouble, necessary trouble, and as Frances, our greatest matriot, said, go vote. Good night.